With more bitter and fiercer sweeps, the plasma shots rained in, opening furnace doors all around us. With heavy pneumatic sighs, more windows opened. Like butterflies from a chrysalis, travellers stepped in from other dimensions, coming down from the sky, stepping up from below, fettered, ruffled, and moved by the journey, stretching and yawning, weary with fatigue. A businessman, a Native American Indian, a loving couple, healthy-looking students with tiredness on their faces, young poppish people with bare feet and guitars, velvet jeans, white cotton and daisy chains. Murderously wild animals set free from the zoo, tamed in the arms of young children. Mayors and monarchs, young dudes and duchesses, hard-wired to the heavens, navigating their way across the universe instinctively without a complete understanding of what it was they were coming to. Without gyroscope or grid, they seemed to have learned the journey as though carried down through generations on a river of genetic information, as though the stars decorated the surface of their world with a map that they should follow through quivering skies towards photons of light that flickered on the event horizons of a million black tears in time. Routed through the mesh of fibre optics, wired through the universe, ships heading west with a sense of belonging. I heard a long female scream from the windows of an apartment block, and the metallic pan of plasma gunfire from a flower eradication team. Streams of white electric charge extended from the bridge of the vehicle to the curb. The beam slowed into an undulating whip that cracked and died in a whisper of black smoke. There were two men running ahead of the FET with their arms full of dried flower petals. They hit the ground together, lifted into the air by the plasma flashes, simultaneously turning somersaults, both describing perfect circles above the pavement, as though the passage from life to eternity comprised of an extremely tortuous and complex leap backwards in time. The ground around them sizzled and glowed in a blue aura. A third man succeeded in sidestepping the flashes of white light, running a zigzag with all his heart. For a moment I thought that he might reach the crossroads, but the FET had a smaller mobile gun on top of the van for such left-field runners. The blast sent flares of plasma after the offender, and then it was his turn to tumble into death. He raised his arms above his head, arched backwards as he leaped, and landed upside down on his shoulders. My heart was pounding as Bruce held on to my jacket sleeve. The streets around Audacia Road were shattered, pavements awash with glass. Dried purple flower petals from torn paper sacks filled the gutter and floated everywhere. Every breath of wind that blew along Audacia raised great clouds of them, swirling in the air like snowfall in reverse, travelling up from the flagstones to the sky above us. We kept very still to allow the FET van to move away. Once it had whistled off, there was such a silence in the street that our footsteps echoed from the walls of the apartments as if we were passing through a rocky ravine in the mountains. When we moved closer to the men, our deepest fears were confirmed, and we saw that the blonde guy was gone. At the time I felt physical pain, and as I tell it now I can feel the tight band constricting my chest and stopping my breath. But it wasn't over. Another man had run to the border wire to collect a handful of flowers to toss to his friends. I heard the crack of a bullet, and my heart began pounding again as I lay on the floor behind the wall, while Bruce was face down holding his head. The first thing I saw was this man's blood, a great red arc across the pristine white wall that seemed to stretch for 20 meters. We froze, watching a sad-looking woman who must have been in her 70s slowly walking up Audacia, completely oblivious to the mayhem, in an expensive dress and coat, high-heel shoes and yellow beehive hairstyle, walking her purple hybrid poodle on its purple rhinestone leash. Two FET transporters turned in the air, playing bumper-to-bumper tag at 50 feet above the ground. They collided, and the officers inside were whiplashed into the windscreens. The plastic trim made squeaking and cracking noises as they creaked the vehicles apart. I had good reason to believe they had been smoking. I could see their wild, intoxicated eyes. Dirty, matted hair mutants scurried around, watching with contempt as we passed through their turf, jeering as the white plasma light stripped down from the FET vehicles that were all around us. When they spotted us, I thought we were a goner. Suddenly everything became hyper-real, and we were bolted to our position, waiting for our turn. I ferreted around for a chance way out. Where do they draw the line? The pod hummed by. We were of no value to them. One hurled laughter and abuse at Bruce, while his buddy shot a beam at a close passerby. An officer in another vehicle watched, shook his head, and laughed as we watched a nattily dressed old man carrying flowers blasted off the mortal coil. From across the road, a crowd looked on, screaming, clapping and laughing, throwing all manner of litter around them. Coconut husks and crushed flower pods were being cast aside with every step. It was the local tax wheeze, a maze of bars full of super weird people. All around us, immigrant voices in some high-step dialect that the great Khans might have understood. One colossal reptile sat in a storm of echoes. Music rang around the marble pillars, surviving from an age that had witnessed the extinction of his type of predator. There we stood, witnessing the positive ecology of gorging, the order of an ancient food chain. Animals half made into the outward image of humans, who would, from time to time, possibly without realizing, show the bestial mark of a Dalmatian spot. A patch of scales or a horn where a horn shouldn't be. There were the dandies in their high hats and fur coats, and their moles in berets and white pancake makeup, uncover FETs and a group of off-duty heavies, all looking for a good time. It was a place where ugly pulsing leviathans could peer into peep shows and become entwined with sexy half-human girls who swiveled in serpentine dresses, waiting to strike at anything else half-human. The heart was blown out of the province last week, and now this solitary place exists solely for the mega-rich. It's a neighbourhood where the neighbours have ceased to be. In their place, empty people seek fiscally advantageous positions alongside the countless despots and dangle diamonds from the pockets of multicoloured bird-shooting jackets and deposit them with their debutantes. Here, at least, the king's promise was becoming a reality. Nothing was a natural fit. While the show inside exploded into a lurid display of lycra-clad bosoms and fluoro-painted G-strings, the parking lot reflected the shift. By growing into a cacophony of vast jet turbines, overpowered muscle cars and oiled flesh. Every American muscle car I know would be usurped by those wheel-less wonders. The wind on our back drove us on, and rustling the paper in which a dead woman was wrapped, I lifted it to expose her naked, withered limbs, a sunken belly, and a face with teeth bared and eyes staring into eternity. Not yet as familiar with the dead as we would become later, we kept on hurrying down the road in fear and disgust, further into a ghetto watching the excited activity of smugglers. At least the FET were less alert now, counting the profits of their raid. Restless shadows appeared in doorways and windows along the road, and then ducked into hiding again, hiding from the teams. The more liberated amongst them had an optimism that manifested itself perhaps subconsciously as a belief in a higher spirit that would make itself known and, against all logic, would guide them to some place of safety, and so they should continue their dance into the darkness and chaos all around them. Although the bomb had been promised, governments and peace councils warned and baited weeks before. I think they're in denial, believing its delivery will only be delayed and they can go along living life in some kind of normality. We found ourselves in the middle of a truly schizophrenic war, one in which we are forever looking to the horizon, peering into the future, trying to discern the shape of things to come, trying to work out which button to press on the collider to make it happen, and at the same time with eyes in the back of my head gazing longingly into the past, trying to ship in the comforting attributes of a long-gone life to make myself feel secure. What made it more bearable was the sight of Bruce, a small oriental man swatting the flies that buzzed around his head, randomly kicking and punching at the images going through his confused mind. The king appeared on television sets at every corner. He cleared his throat, and whilst observing the crowds from under his vulturine eyelids, he found the words to cut deep into the hearts of the people. Low thoughts, crooked words expressed in simple diction so as to be comprehensible to even the most illiterate and appeal to the most simple. Something to lift their minds from the war, something to reawaken patriotism. The people want back the growing land, just as they did when the eternal city was founded. But we have the decency in these conscience-ridden times not to take it back without good reason. The rising of flower culture and its subsequent eradication is a very tiresome and expensive affair, but it has its compensations, for it provides just the excuse needed. I've appointed a former soldier, notorious for brutality, who has already suppressed resistance to the reclamation of land. Router Glut and his team will wipe out unlicensed growers with streams of plasma and rivers of blood. Only after cleansing the land can something new grow. Lies succeeded one another. He spoke well, but lacked the proper key of sincerity to quicken hearts, and as the troops flowed quickly by, the sky changed its colours. The reality of Audacia was made worse because it appeared to be normal at first. The ostraca that branded people licensed growers or users didn't seem to bother them, as every other person was wearing one. After our first couple of nights sleeping in derelict buildings and raiding the shop's car park skips for aging but still edible food items, we found a small packet of strong tobacco on the ground, rolled a loose joint and found a storm drain to shelter in. When you fight for a city, the first thing you fight for are the sewers. They've been crashing around them for months, and the only thing they do down there is dump the dead. So we sat and smoked ourselves into an evening suffused with red. When I slept, I had a dream that I was in Cleopatra's, and everyone was wearing the ostraca armbands. I awoke to Bruce kicking. It wasn't a question of skill, but his style was truly alive, a black expression that seemed to convey the darkness. We lurked around bars frequented by Eternal City university kids. We would light a cigarette and watch the planet turn red. Most of the women wore cosmetics that made them look so young, very young, and far too old. I wasn't sure whether the look was deliberate or something that just happened. The illusion was epidemic. Few looked happy or even remotely like they were enjoying themselves. The hybrids carried themselves with dignity, and the humans carried themselves as though they were looking for lessons. It was weird the way the hybrids smoked their kiln of flowers. We watched as a sheen appeared around them, and they watched us back, as though they were staring at us from the other side of a sheet of distressed glass, almost as though we'd appeared to them as an apparition. They went all flaky looking from head to toe. It was disturbing the way they tried to hide behind their wet-looking smiles. In a moment things got really slippery. Their tongues began sniffing the air and they nervously snatched at their cigarettes. Through a haze I watched them sipping suspiciously on divine-looking drinks. I saw in 20 minutes the widest variety of creatures that I'd seen in a lifetime, but it was the two red suns that caused the most curiosity. After scarcely climbing above the horizon, they were setting with a ruddy glow. They hadn't given out anything that could really be classed as daylight, just a sombre glare. Shortly before they set, the glare disappeared, as though they'd been dampened down. The centres looked shut out. All that was left were two red rims. When they eventually slipped behind the mountains, the road outside was veiled in darkness. The Man Who Lived in an Egg. The man who lived in an egg said, "Nothing is forever," and lay emotionally drenched, with a thirst he couldn't quench. He was the man who lived in an egg, who watched all things blossom and blackberries bloom, all from inside of an egg. He had lost all direction geographically, to document the changes photographically, and was communicating with the world at large with a camera on a tripod and a large set of cards. I spotted him at the angle of a littered side street. For an old man he stood perfectly erect, still wearing the boots and jacket complete with the pips and stripes of a naval officer. He had a handsome tanned face and wavy hair that seemed to swim in the breeze. As I got closer, I could hear him talking to himself in a slow, thoughtful drawl. "I was down for so very goddamn long. Everything looked like the sky to me." You just don't expect to see one of the new conquistadors wandering around aimlessly, rooting through bins. I still think about that day. I can see him in my stars. We'd only been talking to him for a few moments when he invited us into his trailer, a huge chrome cylinder without a door. The world of Major Tom. A Swiss soldier's response would have been to climb inside, screw the door back on with a pocket knife, and get himself comfortable. Pulse-emitting electrodes around the doorframe gave a strange stimulation. Cold pads pressing us all over for weapons. Old habits die hard. Once inside, he changed into a silver suit and began baking and talking with hormonal disposition. I could only put that down to what he'd seen. His mind was still fairly sharp, but odd things slipped, and I found myself every so often providing him with a list of options. With the dust swirling in through the gap where the door should have been, in this miracle of white PVC, with the bubble seats, table and kitchen cabinets all appearing to have been blown from great balls of wax and fairly reeking of high-grade plastic, and there we sat. Bruce and me tuned into his fabulous story, the one about him and his pals, conquerors of the New World, who all played a part in scenes that reversed us back in time. Bare rocket science for two blokes from Blackpool. This was Sigourney Weaver's turf, Flash Gordon's, Buck Rogers, all rolled into one low-class refuge for high-class stoners. There were rules, of course. We could watch him cooking up if he would stand quietly for a moment and not cough, sneeze, and agree to skin up between turns. There were photographs plastered to every wall. Rocket launchers, mission control, and a flight commander with a chest full of medals. I watched the side of Tom's face as his satellite dish ears scooped in the bleeps and bloops from the radio receiver on the roof. Bruce and me, transfixed as that snow-ploughed jaw of his began chinning away over the table, his head nodding out a languid Morse code, and those faraway eyes following his finger as it carved out a neat star map on the dusty surface of the table. "It was on board the last manned spacecraft trying to reach this place here," he said, tapping on the tabletop. "That's where it all began, you know, the problems." "So what happened, Mr. Tom?" "When we got too close to its nearest moon, we saw a few things through a telescope that can drive a man crazy." "Like what?" I said. "Well, artifacts, remains of unfamiliar civilizations. They had the same problems as we do, of course." "So you had to come home?" "Yep. Couldn't get down low enough to set foot on the surface at that time. Didn't have enough fuel left in the tanks." Buzz was with me, and the wing man, Major Rush, coming up to help. I got special leave to a stress disorder. Cooper's syndrome. Malfunction of the inner ear. I got a severe bout of tympaniria, beating against my eardrum like a big bass drum. Of course, that caused the dizziness and vertigo. Grounded for life, age 45. Back on Earth, I was like a great white shark in a tank of people, biting and snapping, twisting and turning with torment. Someone said the wrong word to me, boy, I'd come alive with a kinetic swimming kind of violence. See? I was the only one that cried when we saw what was going on. Once Major Tom was on his emotional journey back in time, all Bruce and me could do was listen. When we first landed on the dark side of that moon, it was as weird and wonderful as anything conjured up in the mind of a physicist. It was darn unreal walking in zero gravity, and that blackness of infinity, sprinkled with the glitter of stars that surround us, and to look back at the galaxies through a telescope. Kind of takes over your senses. We had a bad flight. I always said that we should have helped the Far East. How can a nation who can't build a washing machine dare to send a man to the heavens? Have you ever noticed, when you look out at the galaxies, how much they look like the microscopic images of human brain neurons? We are all products of God thoughts, sadly trapped in his mind, nothing more than the bacteria that coats each cell. But they're all the same. No way. Absolutely no way. That would blow away everything scientific, I said. That was Tom's speciality, deriving kicks from the things that most people would never know. He went into the kitchen. A moment later he was back with a striking luminosity across his face and misty blue eyes that moved around a rattling chrome tray littered with bloody glass vials. "The secretion of leopard adrenal glands," he said, flicking his wrists, "and 2 Cypher canisters." He went about loading them on the table with a clank. "Double ether for the gills, a little eye-opener. Come on. It's later than you think, boys." The man on the radio said it'd be just like being abroad, with everything that could be whizzed up on a blender and painted onto 12 inches of vinyl, playing on a turntable. We got on with it. Tom uncapped one of the canisters, blew some into the cloth and mashed it under his nose, breathing in heavily. I soaked 2 more cloths for Bruce and me, and we buried our noses into the fountain of youth that the conquistadores had gone searching for in the Floridas. The Royal Highness. We found it all too soon. That old devil Cypher, a total body laxative from which the brain shrinks in horror, and despite many attempts is unable to communicate with any aspects of the nervous system. A type of motor neuron dance ensues. The tongue flaps crazily, unable to deliver words from the mouth. Then comes a garbled laughter and the urgent need for hugs and blessings, beseeched through hissing lips. Always grinning, often culminating in a major event, assuming the stance of a village idiot in a medieval pitchfork horror, lost in one life, orbiting another that you can never have, looking into the windows of a brightly lit cottage, dreaming of a refuge while listening to Major Tom staking his claim to the whole of Saturn and going a bit hairy-fairy, if I'm honest. I tried to make a move, just floating too far down the line and past helping. drowning in a river of space between us all. A satellite of the one love, treading water, tumbling uncontrollably, trying to remember my name, just miming words to the ethereal, until it all stopped spinning, and I opened my eyes and my nose on the ceiling, remembering a time when the days were uneventful, watching the trailer failing and fading all around me into a beautiful small light. It's strange how the time and the distance between us makes the problem seem so small. I feel I should let go more often, but take care not to overwork it. Friendship gives love rain, he said, and it can wander where it will. He pulled us both down and collected an armful of instruction manuals from the shelves around us. The three of us sat at the table and helped him earn his living, assembling flying machines for the angels of science from old aircraft parts that were littered around his backyard. The outstretched wings were beautiful, colourful totems of peace in a world of chaos and confusion. Coming down from the apogee, looking out of the trailer, with the main course still rushing through my veins, I watched the western sun falling down, burning through everyone.